Welcome everyone to the CRC Roundtable, a monthly virtual webinar series where we host targeted, inclusive, and informed conversations that match scientific advances and management needs. The webinars are designed for contribution, not consumption, so each webinar invites a diverse range of researchers, managers, and other professionals to have conversations around critical topics. The point of this is to build connectivity between all of us, provide a place to ask clumsy questions, and increase our collective understanding for decision making. As a reflection of that intent, the panelists are given about 25 minutes total for presentations, allowing a full 30 minutes for discussion. These webinars are recorded, and past webinars are available on the CRC website and the Roundtable's YouTube channel. So I encourage you to review these if you've missed some of our past discussions. Please type your name, organization, and location into the chat box so everyone can see today's webinar community. We also ask that you stay muted with your camera off while speakers are presenting. So we typically like to start each webinar by asking why this topic, why now, and why these speakers. And as I was reflecting on today and this month in general, I came across a great quote from Lady Bird Johnson, who once said, "The environment is where we all meet, where we all have a mutual interest. It is the one thing all of us share." And this shared interest in the environment and on a more local level in the Chesapeake Bay and its watershed is most likely in part what is bringing us all together today during Earth Month. The restoration of the Chesapeake has been and will continue to be a Herculean effort that will take engagement from all of us. And as we continue to do this work and evaluate progress towards our goals, we often focus on the work still needing to be done. So today, we want to put a pause on the future planning just for an hour so that we can celebrate successes. Our two speakers will discuss how a stream restoration project transformed a local waterway into a thriving connection point, and how the collaborative large-scale oyster restoration effort across Maryland and Virginia is rebuilding critical habitats. Together, these stories demonstrate the power of targeted local action and coordinated regional initiatives in restoring the largest estuary in the country, and gives us a moment where we can share some successes and celebrate all of our hard work. I'm happy to introduce to you our two speakers, Emily Landis, who is the Director of Education and Environmental Strategy at the Little Conestoga Creek Foundation, the Steinman Foundation, and Stephanie Westby, the Oyster Restoration Program Director at NOAA. Both of our speakers today will talk about their restoration efforts and share the keys to success that helped them achieve the goals that they were working towards. Speakers, I will gratefully let you know if we bump up against time by turning on my camera. And attendees, please feel free to drop your questions into the chat as we go along. If we aren't able to answer your questions during the webinar, we'll give the speakers an opportunity to answer them following today's webinar, and we'll share that information along with any resources mentioned during today's chat, as well as a copy of the recording back to you through our follow-up email. And with that, I will turn it over to our first speaker, Emily.
Thanks, Melissa. Let me share my screen here. All right, I hope you can all see that now. All right, well, thank you for inviting me to speak about the Blue-Green Connector project based in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And let me see here. There we go. A little bit about me. I'm coming to the project from many years spent in STEM education and science communications. So I spent 6 years down in Washington, D.C. working for National Geographic, and then 10 years as the director of our local hands-on science center, the Lancaster Science Factory, before moving to join the foundation. And I'm very excited about this Blue-Green Connector project. And the foundation's role. It all started here at the Conestoga House on Marietta Avenue. And the Steinman family literally was witnessing the rise of floodwaters to their front door, and recognizing that this little Conestoga Creek was pretty severely impaired and that they could do something about it. And so they played a role of venture capital, match funder, support for R&D and engineering. And part of this was really to to meet their foundation's mission of improving quality of life for Lancaster County residents. So they were responding to this problem. Lancaster County has 1,400 miles of waterway, and 80% of them are impaired. The Little Conestoga Creek is one of the most polluted waterways in Lancaster, but we have an opportunity to address that here. At the same time in Lancaster, we're seeing population increases happening, and the community is really seeking access to safe, connected green spaces right where they live and where they work. So the goals of our project are not only to transform an impaired stream, but to help it become a thriving greenway and layer in this ADA accessible trail system. This location is really in a high population, high density suburban urban area in Lancaster. So this will connect thousands of residents to not only this greenway and restored stream, but as you'll see when I share this map, education destinations, healthcare, lots of businesses and other parks and trail systems along the way. So here's our map for the Blue-Green Connector project. And you could see the 6 circled locations are our Little Conestoga Creek floodplain wetland restoration zones. This would total 25 acres when complete, and 3 of these 6 sites are done, with 3 more ready to go in the next year to 2 years. So you will also notice the red route of our 3.5 mile ADA accessible trail system. This will be a 12-foot wide trail with a 5% grade or less. And you're seeing 3 different trailheads here, and then a lot of destinations along the way. When we were coming up with our updated branding and this Blue-Green Connector name, and you could see our frog spokesperson as well. And the idea was that the blue is the stream restoration, the green is this, greenway trail system and restored ecosystem around the waterway. But the connector really speaks to all of the community connections that are happening. You could see that the lands of Franklin and Marshall College are along the way. There is a ton of residential. The crossings features a grocery store and connection to Long's Park. We've got the whole Penn Medicine Lancaster General Health suburban campus along the way here. We've got 2 retirement facilities, Woodcrest Villa and Trillium Place, as well as our local mall, Park City Center. So you can see that there's a lot that is being connected here, and having this multimodal trail system for pedestrians and bicyclists to coexist, to connect to nature, to connect to businesses, will be all these stacked benefits coming out of this project. So our mission is to create a vibrant greenway sanctuary in the heart of Lancaster County by restoring part of the Little Conestoga Creek watershed. It is a 65 square mile watershed, and to serve as a model for collaborative efforts to improve water quality, restore ecosystems, and provide educational and recreational opportunity. I mentioned that this started with the foundation looking outside their door, the Conestoga house, and recognizing that the stream was impaired, and then looking upstream and downstream and saying we could do more than just this area. We could add in this trail. Well, this really has become a layer cake kind of project. There is a research partner in Franklin and Marshall's Chesapeake Watershed Initiative, and then there's a lot going on with education and art that I'm going to speed through this presentation so I can tell you a bit about it. This project has also grown considerably since its inception about 7 years ago, and the 40 easements secured necessary to create this right-of-way for the restoration and trail system. So you can see all of our wonderful partners here. We're thrilled to be working with Land Studies on the floodplain wetland restoration, and have so much support from private donors, county, state, federal funds. I would say the project is about 70% funded, and we're looking to wrap it up by 2029, 2030. So here's a great view, these aerial drone shots courtesy of F&M. You could see the before and after right there along Marietta Avenue, and you could see that we are restoring and welcoming back a native ecosystem that is largely lost in Lancaster County, namely wetlands. Our F&M partners have said that we've lost between 50 and 80% of the wetlands that existed in Lancaster County for thousands of years. And so this project restores a total of 25 acres along approximately 1.7 miles of the Little Conestoga Creek. This will lead to about 4 million tons of sediment reduction, plus thousands of pounds of nutrients removed from this waterway that would otherwise flow to the Chesapeake Bay. Courtesy of Land Studies, these are some renderings of sort of the before restoration impaired condition, where you could see the cap of legacy sediment or eroded soils that have come down from high points and settled in the valley bottoms where this waterway and it flows. And so these constrained waterways oftentimes involve these telltale high muddy banks that are continuously eroding, and they become high-speed channels for the waterway. And then, you could see this is the after restoration view where the historic condition has been returned. And I think I love this image because it highlights the lateral flow. We're seeing so many more flashy rain events where the water just comes down, and instead of shooting through that channel with the high muddy banks and eroding soils, it's now capable of lateral flow and infiltration on site, and it's connecting to groundwater stores and providing honestly a lot of wonderful habitat that before you'll see there's a lot of mown turf lawn right up to the edge of banks. And after, you're seeing wetland species, you're seeing wet meadow, native perennials, and you're seeing a lot of trees planted in the floodplain. So I'm just going to run you through some show and tell with a number of the restoration sites that have been completed. This is at Barcrest Apartments, where the legacy sediment soils are being excavated, and then the erosional matting put down and those wetland plugs put in. And I believe this is 3 or 4 months after the restoration, where you're seeing this colorful wet meadow becoming established and becoming accessible to wildlife. Now that the floodplain is restored, the pollinators are coming back, and this turtle was found in this site about 6 months after restoration. At Conestoga House, I showed you this image before. You can see what it looked like before restoration, and then the Barcrest restoration on the other side of the bridge there. And then this is immediately after restoration. And then again in May, as the green is starting to establish. Fast forward to July, it's looking a little bit greener, a bit more lush. And then by August, we're really seeing it look just gorgeous. And, we were starting to appreciate a number of springs being exposed on site, and they're contributing nice cold groundwater to this restored floodplain. Here's final views of the Mennonite Home Trillium Place restoration. And this design that is just north of the Harrisburg Pike Road and Bridge there. And you can see that this is a situation where there has been a lot of flooding, and this restoration is strategic in attenuating those big flood events. A lot of capacity here for floodwaters to infiltrate on site. And then beyond the bridge, you're seeing the final area where restoration will occur in the next year and 2 years. It's flanked on the right by that Park City Center, lots of impervious surface there, and on the left by Woodcrest Villa. So we are looking forward to really creating this showpiece of restoration that will be highly visible from thousands of people driving their cars down Harrisburg Pike and flanking both sides of that road in a high population zone. We are just thrilled to be partnering with Franklin and Marshall College's Chesapeake Watershed Initiative. as the active research partner, studying all aspects before and after a restoration and the impact that it's making. So this group involves 4 principal investigators in the geology, environmental science, and economics departments. And they also have 3 postdocs and a host of students and staff that are working on this. And here's a great shot of the trenching by F&M and Land Studies at the Woodcrest Villa site, where you could see that cap of legacy sediment, lighter soils, and then those darker wetland soils beneath. Those have been radiocarbon dated to between 300 years and 10,000 years ago, and really confirmed as being, stable wetlands for many, many thousands of years in these locations. And so much of what F&M is doing is building upon this landmark science article from 2008. And their work involves so many different research questions, but we've been very thrilled to see that they've installed 4 in-stream continuous water quality monitors. And so we're getting some early data on the influence and the impact of these restorations. So let me tell you more about our layer cake and how we're adding in education and arts along this trail. So the question that was posed to me when I was brought on board as a STEM educator was, let's transform this trail into an environmental learning laboratory, and what could that look like? And so I think there's been a lot of enthusiasm for the tactics described on this slide. Really 3-dimensional, engaging exhibits, elevated interpretive signage. Everyone seems to want audio guides that they can listen to, take a deep dive on stream restoration for 20, 30 minutes as they're walking along this trail. We definitely want to see art aligned with our educational goals, demonstration areas, outdoor learning spaces, and some citizen science engagement. And this is just a little preview of my educational master plan, as we've cited things along the way. What topics should be covered where? Forest ecology, invasive species, bird identification. We're just layering in these topics where they seem best suited. So here's an example of what this will be looking like. This is my clean water kiosk that's going in at 2 trailheads coming soon. And a tractor in the middle is this 4-foot wide 3D topo map of the watershed, and a lot of content inside on the watershed, helping people to become more aware of their relation to their local watershed and the bay, and some of the challenges facing our little Conestoga and what they can do to help. This is a view of one of our outdoor classrooms that will face the Trillium Place restoration. And we're really just trying to layer in the science, the history, and little pieces of information for how people can make an impact and be part of this project to clean water and restore habitat. I'm just wrapping up, Melissa, with some information on the K-12 alignment that we're doing. There's a lot to say, but Pennsylvania launched its new science standards in 2025. Science, technology, engineering, environmental literacy, and sustainability. And this is really pushing teachers K through 12 to bring their students outdoors for real world experiences, student-led action projects. I think a lot of people are familiar with MIWIs, and they really need access to healthy ecosystems. So many schools are landlocked or just have grassy lawns. And so the challenge for them to overcome is to get out to places like the Blue-Green Connector, where they can study functioning ecosystems, have access to waterways, and have all the infrastructure needed for learning. So we're really excited to get our Teach the Teacher program off the ground with Teaching with Money Boots. We've got a second cohort of 10 high school science teachers coming out in a couple of weeks, and they are developing steel-aligned lesson plans and planning field trips with their students. So my final slide is just to recap the Little Conestoga Blue-Green Connector's goals. We're hoping to help restore the Little Conestoga Creek, We will build a 3.5-mile system of ADA accessible trails. Just broke ground this summer. And we will be doing some serious placemaking through education and the arts. And we're just thrilled to be the focus of research and best management practices with our higher ed partners. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Emily. This is an incredible project. I was really excited as we're going along. And now we'll turn it over to Stephanie.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Stephanie Reynolds Westby with NOAA, and thrilled to be here. And Emily, I really appreciate your presentation and love this idea that we're really going from the headwaters down to the main stem of the watershed, because we do know it's all connected. All right. And Melissa, can you just give me a verbal yes if you're seeing my screen?
Looks good.
Great, thanks so much. First of all, I want to say a thank you to all of the folks listening here for taking your time in the middle of your day to come and hear these presentations. And I'm beyond thrilled to be part of a panel that's called Success Stories in the Chesapeake Bay. I couldn't think of a nicer title, so thanks, Melissa, for that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the large-scale oyster restoration we've been doing further down, of course, in the main stem of the Chesapeake Bay, where the water is not fresh like it is up in Lancaster, but rather brackish, which is a mix of salty and fresh. So starting with, what did we set out to do here? Well, this was a collective goal to do large-scale oyster restoration. We've been doing a few acres here, a few acres there for 10 or 15 years. And about 15 years ago, we decided to see if we could take those things that had worked on a small scale and really scale them up. The Chesapeake Bay oyster population is estimated to be at about 1% of its historic level. And when you lose 99% of your oyster reefs, you lose 99% of the ecosystem services that those reefs provide. So that's the fish habitat and the water filtration and the oyster harvest and all of those services. So we thought, could we really try to approach this large scale problem with a large scale restoration effort? So this was a multi-partner effort. I'm going to say we a lot, and I don't mean NOAA by any chance. It's NOAA, it's the Army Corps of Engineers, it's EPA's Chesapeake Bay program, the states of Maryland and Virginia, NGOs, scientists, academics, a whole cadre of partners that were really involved in this over the last decade plus. And just one of the bullets here, all of the reef restoration that we're talking about in this presentation and under this initiative is non-harvest. So these are what we've started calling parent reefs, reefs that we will stock with oysters in large densities. And then the offspring of those reefs, which are free floating, may populate nearby harvest reefs and be able to be populated and to help the harvest that way. But the actual reefs that we're creating under this initiative are all designated as sanctuary or non-harvest areas. So what was this collective goal we had? The goal was, and you can see it there in italics, restore oysters in 10 Chesapeake Bay tributaries by 2025, last year, and ensure their protection. That was part of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement, which is done under the auspices of the Environmental Protection Agency, but signed by actually the feds and each of the states in the watershed. It's an unusual policy document. So the first thing we did before we started hauling off and building a lot of reefs was design success criteria, right? And these were to say, okay, what does a successful reef look like, right? Once we defined that, we could then actually plan to build these reefs to that success criteria. And those were things we decided 6 years was the period. So you build a reef 6 years later. Does that reef have enough oysters? Does it have enough biomass? Does it have enough shell on it? Is it maintaining its size, or is it sinking or shrinking, right? So all of those things were part of the definition of successfully restored reef. And then you might have noticed that goal back there at the top, that's not couched in terms of a certain number of reefs. It's couched in terms of a certain number of tributaries. So we needed to restore 10 tributaries. So then the question was, how many of these restored reefs do you need before your whole tributary can be successfully restored, right? So having those success criteria right up front before we started this initiative was very important. And we finished those actually more than 10 years ago. From there, collectively, we could start selecting tributaries, designing restoration plans, right, to bring each of these tributaries from whatever oyster population it had to whatever it needed in order to be successful for this initiative. And then we implemented, we found the money for all this, we tracked together, and then we went back and monitored again to see if each of these reefs were meeting these pre-established success criteria. And there were parallel research efforts going on, meanwhile, from the scientific community to start determining, okay, if we build all these, thousands of acres of reefs, is that going to impact the local tributary? Are we really getting that filtration level, that nitrogen and phosphorus reduction, the cleaner water that we're looking for? So that's what we set out to do. Next logical question, Stephanie, how's it going so far? We can see the map here that these are the 10 tributaries that we decided on. And happily, as of October of last year, all of the work that we've planned in these tributaries is complete. So we have built enough reefs in each of these that each of them can be considered successfully restored. That equaled a little over 1,900 acres of reefs if you add all of those reefs and all of those 10 tributaries combined, and that's about 3 square miles, if you add it all up. So again, we were doing a few acres here, a few acres there, and now we're up to 3 square miles. We've really increased that scale over the past decade. This is pricey business by anybody's measure. We are still adding up totals, but it's going to be about $120 million all said and done over the course of that decade. When each reef turns 3 and then turns 6, we monitor it. The middle one is called a sort of an interim checkpoint, but at 6 years, again, under this next initiative, we give it that yes, is it succeeding, or no, is it not succeeding? Of the reefs that we've monitored for 6 years, which is about a little over a third of them are already 6 years old, 99% of those are meeting our minimum success criteria, and 85% happily are meeting our higher, what we call a target criteria. So that's the level we really want to see those reefs functioning at. That's what we're aiming for, but we'll call you inbounds if you're a little bit below that. So again, 99% meeting the minimum, 85 meeting the higher target level. So we were pleased with that information. Wanted to give you a sense of scale, because sometimes you think bay wide and 3 square miles and 1,900 acres, and what does all that mean? So here are 2 examples of individual tributaries. One was the Menoken River in Maryland, and you can see at about a 6.5 mile stretch of this river, we restored 455 acres. So you can see it's a fair amount of the bottom of this river. So this is large scale. This is large barges full of stone and oyster shell going in with big cranes, again, to try to get to that scale. And then the similar Piankatank example across about a 5 mile stretch of this river in Virginia, we restored 294 acres. So that's all of those green patches in this slide. Next question might be like, so Stephanie, you've been talking a lot about building reefs. How do you do that, right? What do you mean by building a reef? Couple basic treatments that we use. One is if we have an existing reef, some nice reef structure on the bottom, and we have some oysters on it, just not really as many oysters as we want to meet those success criteria, we can do what we call seed-only treatment. So that is produce oysters in a hatchery. There's a massive hatchery on the eastern shore of Maryland. It's part of the University of Maryland system. They produce billions of oysters a year. And we take a lot of those oysters and put them on these planting vessels and plant them out on the reef. So we've got an existing reef. We just add oysters. The next thing that we can do in some other areas is just put down a reef base. So if you have a river, this mostly happens in southern Maryland, and very southern Maryland, and in Virginia, where there's no reef currently, but there's good hard bottom where we can put literally tons of typically stone, sometimes shell, mostly stone. That's my foot in there to give you a sense of scale. And we put tons of this shell down, generally between 6 inches and 12 inches high. And then we can let nature do the work from there. You've got good natural recruitment, in other words, healthy reefs nearby that are reproducing. And those offspring, those larvae from those reefs are free swimming and will land on this substrate that we put down. So we call that reef substrate only treatment. And then, of course, there's a lot of reefs where we have to do the whole thing. We have to put the substrate down because there's no reef and there's not good oyster recruitment locally, and we have to put the seed on top of it. So we sort of, bake the cake and then frost it, as it were. So those are the basic mechanisms for building the reefs. How's the public engaged in this whole thing, right? A lot of this is being done through federal and state contracts with these big marine construction corporations, tugs pushing, scores of barges down the bay in order to deploy this large amount of reef building substrate. We don't want to leave the public out of this, right? We don't want to leave the people out of this whole thing. So we had several open houses in order to get input from the local community or the interested public on our draft plans for each of these tributaries. You all might have heard of these oyster gardening programs where schools and civic groups and citizens can grow oysters alongside their docks. Those are primarily through the state of Maryland and the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. And then some of those oysters that are grown in these cages are then planted out on these reefs. It's a great way for the community to get involved. A lot of the students do scientific research project, measure how the oysters are growing, learn about their ecosystem service impact. A number of groups ran what they call a rod and reef slam fishing tournament on our restored reefs to try to bring attention to that fish habitat value and the importance of these reefs for recreational anglers. And then individual groups have done different things. There was a 0.05K, yes, I said 0.05K sprint for SPAT that Oyster Recovery Partnership did to raise money for this whole thing. There was a bay paddleboarder who paddleboarded the length of the bay and raised money. So there are a lot of efforts, big and small, that went into this that engaged the public. Kind of wrapping up here a little bit, what did we learn from this whole thing, right? It's been 10 plus years. It's been $120 million. It's been all of this effort. What did we learn? We learned that oyster restoration can be done at this scale. This had never been done before globally. And it was fairly audacious to set out and do this, but we felt like the Chesapeake had been the heart of the restoration effort for oysters globally in the past. Maybe we could do this, and happily we've been able to collectively. And it's become a national and international model of how to do large scale restoration. We've had people from all over the world come and learn about how we've done this. And also a nice model success story for large scale habitat restoration generally. We've learned that it's expensive. Like I said, $120 million over 10 years. That is not a small price to pay really in anybody's book. And we've learned, depending how you value things, the ecosystem services that we're getting back from these reefs may well make it worth the investment, right? So I have two examples here, and this will be recorded, so anybody who wants to get into the weeds can reference these two papers that have been published. But the first one shows that the reefs in just one of those 10 tributaries alone provides about $3 million a year in nitrogen and phosphorus reduction services, right? So that one tributary cost 28 million, let's call it 30 million to make the math easy, dollars to restore with oyster reefs. But if you're getting $3 million a year back in this one ecosystem service, that suggests about a 10-year return on investment period, right? And everything after that is gravy. So again, $120 million sounds like a lot, but when you start actually quantifying and putting a price tag on the ecosystem services, the math sometimes works out quite favorably. Second bullet there was a modeling study that showed that once 3 out of the 10 tributaries lumped together is what this modeling study looked at, said that once those reefs were fully mature, which was they considered 10 years, and we're really providing that fish habitat value, that should equal a $22.8 million annually increase in what should be able to be harvested off of that. Not the oysters, but the crabs and the striped bass and the perch and all the other species that congregate around these oyster reefs. So, and that is compared to had we just built that reef and then immediately harvested the oysters off in about 3 years once they were fully mature and ready for harvest. So even though we're not getting that direct harvest benefit from these reefs, we should be getting a fair amount of monetary value from this ecosystem service of fish habitat. We also learned that partnerships are key. This was a massive undertaking, and no one group would likely have been able to plan this, fund this, and bring all of that expertise to the table that was needed for this. The public on this has been generally very supportive, but we learned we got to build our reefs correctly. We had 2 different cases where the reefs that went in the water were not built to spec. One case, some of it had to be removed, a couple of acres. Another case, they were built too high and a few boats ran aground. That did not do us any favors in terms of, the public acceptance of this whole effort, right? So it went well. It did not go perfectly. And also not everyone loves this. These areas that we're building in some cases, a little more than a decade ago, were actually removed from harvest status and instead placed in sanctuary status. And if you are a commercial oyster harvester who has harvested in that area for maybe generations, that truly is a loss, right? So I do want to make sure that I acknowledge all of these, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And overall, I'll say this feels hopeful, right? I mean, sometimes it feels like there's not a lot of good news generally, and particularly in the environmental sphere. And it is nice to know that we can work at this scale and at least start bringing back some of these oysters. Just a quick word on what we're doing next. You may have done the math or noted the dates that in 2025, we completed that decade-long large-scale oyster restoration initiative. Happily, at the very end of 2025, there was a brand new Chesapeake Bay agreement that also included an oyster outcome. So what are we going to do for the next? This outcome is actually 15 years. So we're going to be busy over the next 15 years maintaining the reefs that we built. So that 3 square miles that we built, we don't want to let anything happen to those. We want to be good stewards of them, whatever that means. Is that putting more oysters on? Is that just monitoring? We're going to keep an eye on them and see what they need. And by 2040, 15 years, we want to do another 2,000 acres. So we did 1,900 last time. We want to do 2,000 this time. And we also want to work with the fishery in each state to make sure, the oyster fishery, to make sure that's done sustainably and try to have those fishing grounds yield additional oyster abundance as well. Overall, I'll leave you with this last slide, which I think, the secret sauce or maybe the winning formula behind this last round and hopefully going to the next round is that if we can have large scale, collaborative, science-based oyster reef restoration plus energized and engaged citizens, that's how we get our oysters back. That's how we get all of those ecosystem services that we want, and also help the fishery hopefully along the way. So I thank you. I will now turn it back to Melissa.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. That's an incredible project at such a large scale with tons of partners. So congratulations again for all of the success there and all of the work that you all have done.
Thank you.
So folks, if you have questions, please continue to drop them into the chat. One question came up. This was targeted specifically for Emily, but we got this question in general through our registration process too. And that is sort of about the question in the chat read, any stories you'd like to share about changing the hearts and minds of landowners that have joined the restoration areas? The messenger can really matter. So your background in science education is an asset. And building off of that question, the one that was related that we got ahead of time was really talking about balancing the interests of stakeholders as you're moving forward with these restoration projects to, ensure that you have buy-in enough to make the project successful. So we'll start with you, Emily, and I know Stephanie, you had touched on this a little bit, but if you have anything you want to add, feel free to add on after Emily.
Sure. So the question about approaching landowners and sending the right messenger is so important. I was not the messenger, but one of the messengers was the former CEO of Turkey Hill Dairy, and having that sort of background that was recognizable to people, I think was a real asset for the project. We also benefited from the fact that we weren't going to a lot of individual residential homeowners. We were going to a lot of either public or sort of institutional land. You know, we were going by places that wanted more people to access them, like the crossings, like Penn Medicine, the health campus, like Park City. And so there was that sort of access buy-in to the trail, in addition to the stream restoration. You know, you saw that 3.5-mile trail system. It feels arbitrary. You know, it can keep on going further north and south. And I think the true test will be the wait and see folks that are saying, like, we want to see how this goes. We want to see how it will impact our property value and the traffic. And will it really be this convenience to us? Will we see tangible benefits? And then I really think there's some opportunities to extend it to the north and to the south. I know that there's a number of organizations working on separate projects. Immediately downstream, the Little Conestoga Watershed Alliance has gotten a number of private landowners on board with a restoration project. Are they open to the trail? I would say much less so, not in their backyards. But it's a wait and see. You know, maybe we route it around the neighborhood. There's still restoration benefits and the trail picks up elsewhere. So I'm excited to see how this develops, and check in with me in 3 years, because I'm sure we'll be getting an earful from neighbors as we, you know, construct this trail, and really the restoration and succession sort of takes place, and people understand it better.
Yeah, Emily, I'm really struck by that, and the sort of the similarities and differences between building a project like the one you did with the trail, right, that people are going to be able to use, right, for better or maybe for worse, if there's parking and it's very tangible and they're going to be able to see it, and it may literally be, you know, adjacent to their property. A lot of similarities in the outreach generally, but also a few differences with oysters because they're underwater and you can't see them, right? Nobody's going to ride their bike through these oyster reefs, right? And that has been a joy and a challenge, right? So it's a little less immediately sometimes in people's backyard. We did a lot of outreach to the adjacent landowners and the open house and that kind of thing, but it isn't quite as connected. But people, and yet a lot of people do very much utilize the water. So the anglers love this project, right? And they all sort of want it in their backyard or wherever they fish. Sailors, where they have a keel and they need a more water depth, and here we are shallowing and making an already shallow Chesapeake Bay a foot or so shallower. We needed to do some work around that. We had jet skiers, we had people who were worried about falling off paddle boards onto sharp, you know, oyster reefs, that kind of thing. So really a broad variety of, you know, joys and concerns that we heard from people overall, and we did try to incorporate them where we can. I guess we'll take it as a win that one of the big things we heard is, you know, when are you coming to my tributary, right? I mean, we did 10 tributaries, but that doesn't cover where most people live or recreate, right? It's a very small portion of the bay. So hopefully we'll be able to do this, make this whole thing go a bit farther afield in the next round, while keeping you know, folks on board, and by doing this in a way that people really want it.
Great. Thank you for those thoughts. Now, Stephanie, when you were talking about your project, you mentioned some monitoring that would be going on at different intervals after the reefs went in. Question for Emily actually was there any monitoring done at the start of the project or plans for monitoring after the project to see if there were any water quality benefits that you would be reporting on post-restoration?
Yeah, great question. Our partner at F&M installed three exosons, continuous in-stream water quality monitoring stations at these locations above our restoration, in the middle, and then downstream. And so they're already noting that the water temperatures are about 5 degrees cooler at the southern location. And I really think that there's a lot of data now that they're eager to analyze seasonally. One thing I'm excited about is to take that really large amount of data and make it accessible to the public. So the F&M team has been willing to walk with me on this path of community engagement. And we identified Hudson River Park has a really wonderful public-facing water quality dashboard that runs off of their in-stream exosons. So I could drop a link to what they have on their website in the chat, but you'll see visualizations of the data for dissolved oxygen, turbidity, water temperature, acidity, rainfall, and bacteria. I really think that there's a low level of awareness in our community about our water health and how polluted this little Conestoga Creek is. And so it really raising awareness with this dashboard and really promoting it and having it be advertised as like, how's the little Conestoga doing today? Check in. This is updated every 15 minutes. It's truly a live stream. I'm really hoping to break through with this tool. And I think over time, we'll have a lot of data that F&M will be publishing and sharing on the true impact of all six restoration sites that are part of this project. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Emily. And Stephanie, there's a question in the chat for you about sort of the future status of some of these oyster reefs. Currently, they're all treated as sanctuaries. Wondering if down the road, if there's any thought to considering opening any of them for harvest, or if your team has sort of talked about what that might look like going into the future.
Sure. These were all built with the purpose, again, of having them be parent reefs. So being here in perpetuity to provide these ecosystem services and hopefully export juvenile oysters onto the harvest reefs nearby and clean the water and do all of those things. That said, it's ultimately up to each state as to whether they allow harvest on these reefs or not. And it's a little different in Maryland and Virginia. In Maryland, oyster reefs used to be, when we started this initiative, all these areas were closed as sanctuaries by regulation. That has since bumped up to statute. So right now in Maryland, all of these areas that we worked on last round, or in the past 10 years, are statutorily closed to harvest. Now that could change, right? It changed in the last decade. It could change again, right? Laws can change, but that's a pretty high bar to change a law. Not that it can't be done. In Virginia, all of the areas are closed still annually by regulation, right? And they could be opened without a statutory change. It would be a regulatory change.
Great, thank you for that. So you've both talked about successes in terms of, getting these projects on the ground, completing your restoration activities. I'm curious, in your mind, like as you vision what success looks like for this project, what is your criteria for a successful project in terms of kind of the long-term results of your work here?
Yeah, great question. Coming from the education side of things, I think it's really that community engagement and awareness and empowerment. I want people to connect with this waterway that's like a microcosm of the 1,400 miles of waterways in Lancaster County, 80% of which are impaired, and learn as they're doing it. We have this golden opportunity to walk a very significant portion of our population by these major floodplain wetland restorations and to engage them with programs, educational events, signage and exhibits, that trailside experiential education, plug in K-12, plug in higher ed. So what I want to see is just a lively, flourishing, informed community as a result of this project.
Yeah, I love that vision, Emily, and I agree that I think an engaged citizenry is really the key. So to me, that's I'm thinking of your pyramid, Emily, in your presentation, right? Like I feel like the citizens are the highest level of that, right? So we, you know, the technical folks, we know how to build these reefs at this point, right? I mean, we need money and they're expensive, and we gotta, you know, make sure that money keeps flowing. But if the citizenry is interested in and engaged and demands more of these, we can deliver on that. If the citizenry doesn't care or is not connected or disengaged, then it all kind of comes to a standstill. So I guess my hope or vision would be beautiful, thriving oyster reefs on the bottom that you can see actually from a boat because the water's clear enough and people are fishing on them and people are swimming in the water nearby. And so they are engaging with them in that way, at least a lot of them are, and that they feel like they want to keep these and they want more of them. And even for people who maybe don't recreate directly on the bay, just knowing that in their water, that their watershed is healthy. I think there's sort of a certain um, sense of stewardship that happily more and more folks are having these days, and that if they can see that in action, that's really the top of the pyramid there.
Great. Thank you both for sharing those thoughts. And I'm curious, I know obviously funding is important, it makes a difference, but outside of funding, if there was a particular element that made your project successful where you would say, like, to do something similar to this, you have to have this to move forward. What would each of you say? And we'll start with Stephanie this time and then go to Emily.
Sure. I think it's obviously funding's huge, but collaboration and having that one big common goal that we were all sort of pulling toward, which allowed the common planning, which allowed the common implementation and common tracking and monitoring. Just having us all, you know, working along that same continuum from goal to implementation to monitoring and then hopefully to success under this initiative. So I think that's incredibly important. And I know it sounds like a broken record, but having public support for it, right? Because that is going to feed into the funding, and that is going to feed into how long these reefs are around ultimately.
Yeah, I would say there were two key factors to our success. One, the Pennsylvania DEP has given our project a special watershed permit that has streamlined the process. So doing those 6 projects individually would have taken a lot longer. There would have been a lot more paperwork, I guess. Having that DEP permit, and they're holding it up as a replicable model. They want other watersheds to use this approach. And it has definitely allowed us to move more nimbly as we have tackled, once the funding is placed, then we're able to tackle it very quickly. So the other factor, of course, is the Steinman Foundation and the Little Conestoga Creek Foundation. Having a philanthropic lead has a number of benefits. They could step in and provide match funding when it's necessary. Sometimes when you're trying to line up that complex equation of funding and timing, having that flexible foundation partner is critical. I mentioned them being willing to fund the design work, fund some of the research work, the early engineering work on the project. So to get it actually off the ground and to have the ambitious vision. I'm thinking of someone at the foundation who would call it the crazy idea, but they really provided that spark and then that backbone to allow the project to proceed.
Great, thank you. And you both mentioned sort of community engagement as key elements or features of each of your restoration activities. And one of the questions that we had come in with the registration was about volunteerism as some of the restoration work is actually being implemented. So could you talk to how volunteerism showed up, or if it showed up through each of your projects? And we'll start with you, Emily, this time, and then go to Stephanie.
Sure. Yeah, I envision there being an active Little Conestoga Stewards volunteer program that I would like to establish. We we just launched our first tree planting with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, and to supplement the 25 acres of floodplain restoration that Land Studies is leading, we see an opportunity for potentially 30 acres of riparian buffer. So really creating this wildlife corridor and really beefing up the green space along the Little Conestoga is definitely a goal. So this is a great way where a partnering organization can organize tree plantings, and we will be doing them a lot in the coming years. Yeah, there's a lot of interest. I'm collecting names. People are signing up. They want to help. And I'm trying to identify discrete projects where they can plug in. But no doubt we will need help with invasive removal, trash cleanup, and there's a lot of organizations that are looking for discrete experiences. So they're looking for 2 hour, half day, full day, sort of, I would call it like team building opportunities. And this is something that locally the Lancaster Conservancy does well. And I volunteer with them, and I'm hoping to apply some of their great practices on our site. So we're really hoping to grow the volunteer corps in the future. I think it will also be key to have folks that are willing to commit kind of the long term and be checking in on their own time instead of part of these little one-off volunteer events. So I think putting together lots of different points of entry and flavors of involvement, and then also dedicating the staff time to nurturing those volunteers. I can tell you when I worked for the Science Factory, we had about 150 active volunteers working on the Science Center floor. And you need to recruit them, you need to train them, you need to communicate effectively with them, and you need to motivate them to keep on coming back and celebrate their work. So never underestimate the power of volunteers, but always allocate the time and resources to make sure that they can really help you.
Yeah, I think on the oyster restoration front, this is an amazing role that a lot of our partners in this have taken on, right? I mean, I'm with NOAA, with the federal government, Army Corps of Engineers was involved in this, right? Not necessarily always the most volunteer friendly, right? On the federal front, there's a lot of strictures there, but the NGOs, the local watershed groups do an amazing job of this. I know I mentioned in my presentation that you can grow oysters alongside your dock at your marina or your cousin's backyard or your backyard, or whatever it is, as long as the water has enough salt in it, which most of the main stem of the bay does. So that has been an amazing opportunity for people to have hands-on stuff, especially the classrooms, right? Because that has a great multiplier effect. If one teacher can get set up with oyster cages, that could be 90 students or however many they have. So that has been a great opportunity. And again, yay for partnerships, because some of those NGOs do a fabulous job. Oyster Recovery Partnership is another one. And I don't want to sell the state of Maryland short either, because they have it's called Marylanders Grow Oysters program as well. It's just their own oyster gardening program. So yeah, lots of ways to get involved.
Great. Well, Emily, Stephanie, thank you so much for spending some time and allowing us to shout out your success in honor of Earth Month and all of the hard work that's being done on behalf of the Chesapeake from your programs. Really appreciate you. And there was a question in the chat about making slides available. We will be sending out a link to the recording, which will have the presentations, so you'll be able to catch any of those resources there. And if we did not get to your question, we will send it to Stephanie and Emily to see if we can get you an answer and send that up to our follow-up email as well. So thank you all again. And we hope that you will join us in May for our next roundtable.